Good evening, and thank you for attending our board meeting. We'll call this board meeting of the Nelson County Board of Education to order June 2nd, 2020 at 5:30 p.m. Section 2, changes to the agenda.
No changes to the agenda tonight.
Excellent. Section 3, Fall 22 Impossible. Welcome back. Our team leads have some input.
So I wanted to just take just a few minutes to talk about some of the conversation we had last Friday morning on the community brew, and also talk a little bit about where our timeline is for communicating and making decisions for our Fall 2020 welcome back for all students. So the key, really, the nice thing about this conversation over the past 3 months, regardless of the changes that took place, our storyline around impossible, together we can create the future, has continued to resonate and hold true. And I think that is very much our storyline throughout this summer. We're going to have to get very close together in our planning processes, and we've already started that process. And over the coming weeks, we'll be working on a number of plans that allow us to enter into a conversation in July with families that allow them to feel confident and comfortable moving forward in whatever options may be available. So specifically, one of the questions that has continued to come up is what does change this summer? And I think part of that is focusing, for me, what doesn't change. And the big piece is our purpose, our vision for the work with students, and our values. We recognize that resource allocation, the way we think about priorities, does shift. We also recognize that our strategy potentially to deploy learning looks a little different. And that's something that we'd be naive to think differently about. And we recognize that it's going to take a lot of teams working together to ensure that we can not only align to our purpose, empowering lives and excavating gifts through our vision, but also thinking about, regardless of the strategy that we use, that our values are still at the heart of all we do. So a big part of that conversation we've continued to think about is what does it mean to be in the Nelson County schools? And we've talked a lot about community-centeredness and community-centered school ecosystem. This is our most recent draft. It's not highly sophisticated in its design at this point, but essentially it revolves around this idea of uniting people, place, and purpose. And this is really the way that we think about the gifts of our community, those students, teachers, and community members that are part of our school to make our schools so great. The place, whether that's in the building, outside of the building, in our community, or otherwise, and uniting people around purpose. And that purpose really is what gives our teams, our students, a sense of ownership and a sense of autonomy, and something that we know is so important to our work we do here in the Nelson County schools. Again, this is something that these ideals we want to continue and will be pursuing regardless of any model that we're undertaking in the Nelson County schools. So the timeline for decision making is something that we also know is very important to families, and it's very important to us as we prioritize our time and energy. So there are 3 teams that are beginning to work this week. We have a health and safety team, a teaching and learning team, and a community collaboration team. You can see the makeup of those teams, and these teams will be working over the course of the next 4 weeks to prepare resource agility plans that we can enact in July, that based on guidance from the state and based on guidance from our local health department, that we can enact learning regardless of the model with a safe learning environment that also allows for resource agility. So we've already started the planning process. Ms. McCoy and the community health work that she's doing, and continuing to collaborate with state and local officials. And that special project teaming starts this week, while we're also collaborating with others across the state. And our goal is July 1st through the 10th to finalize strategy and calendar decisions. Again, this is our goal. July 10th is to finalize that decision. We talked about the implications of that on potentially having a special called board meeting in advance of what would be a later July board meeting that we currently do not have a work session in July, and this may require us to add that. So again, this is our current goal. What we have learned during the COVID pandemic is that sometimes guidance comes from the state or federal government that does force you to shift. We want to be prepared, and we're continuing to take in that guidance and sort through it and determine what that means for us. So we are sending out a family message, and I think that that timeline is this weekend. That'll be going into the mail. We are hosting a family community brew on the 19th. That'll be live, and we're taking questions from that over the course of the next 2 weeks at impossible.org, where we will be working to collect further data and inquiry from parents. And I think we'll be working with our schools to ensure that by July 10th, there's a local message coming from each school that allows them to communicate with families intentionally. And then following July 10th, our goal is that we have one-on-one communication with families from across our district during the course of that week. And we'll be planning to allocate the resources to make that come to life. We have a lot of thinking to do to ensure that that is smooth and supportive in order to care and connect with every family in our community. But we know that during this transition back to school, whatever form it takes, that it's really important that we're collecting very local intelligence with our families in order to understand their needs. So, additionally, Mr. Goss can talk a little bit about this. This week, the Kentucky High School Athletic Association has allowed and enacted the return to sport activities.
Thank you. I want to first commend Matt Reynolds, who's Student Leadership Director at Nelson County High School, and then Joe Peak, who was recently named the Student Leadership Director at Thomas Nelson. They've worked a lot over the past 3 or 4 days. There's been a lot of guidance coming out of HSAA and the Kentucky Department of Education around sports and activities, and they've played a role in really helping to craft this decision making. So for us, there's kind of 4 phases to this. This comes from the Kentucky High School Athletic Association. So starting yesterday through June 14th, coaches can begin having contact with athletes in person, one-on-one. That's a change from previous. So if you remember, we've actually been in a dead period, just like we would traditionally in the middle of summer for sports. Starting now, we can begin having conversations. We also want to take time to ensure that we communicate with coaches, and Matt and Joe will be sitting down individually to have some conversations with our fall sport coaches on making sure they have the plans and processes in place between now and June the 14th. And then on June 15th, we kind of enter the next stage where outdoor conditioning can begin. We won't be in gyms. We won't be able to go into locker room or house facilities, but we can do outdoor conditioning. Those are in groups of 10 or less, so that kind of depends on the sports team, how many kids are involved, how many coaches are there and available. But we know that kids have to be, we can't have more than 10 people in a situation. And then during that time, there's not any use of sports-specific equipment, so we won't have basketballs, we won't have volleyballs, we won't have footballs. It is really just getting kids back into the physical conditioning aspect of sports. So one of the changes this year, if you remember, traditionally June 25th through July 9th is a traditional dead period for Kentucky High School athletics. That is no more for 2020 because we've been in a dead period now for about the last 6 weeks. So there is that has changed, which means that some of the guidance changed as well. So starting June 29th, we can begin a return to practicing with no more than 50 people. So that really only affects our football teams. Maybe girls basketball is at the middle school level might fit into that, but they can't have more than 50 people. And you also see that drills and sports-specific equipment can begin being used, but I think I have an asterisk because football equipment is still not going to be able to be issued. I think the commissioner said today that when we start issuing football equipment is when we kind of let the reins loose, because we know when that happens, there's really not a lot of safety precautions that can exist. So we hope that during that time we can start using volleyball, those sorts of things, but we won't be issuing helmets, shoulder pads, any of that until further guidance. And then after July the 13th, the Kentucky High School Athletic Association will have additional guidance. The commissioner said he's taking us about 2 to 4 weeks at a time. So that's where we are. During each of these periods, we will also, whether they're meeting with groups of 10 or groups of 50, whatever that looks like, we will have temperature checks. We're working with athletic trainers, ensuring those procedures are in place. I think we're going to order individual water bottles, so that kids are not sharing water or coming out of the same cooler for that. So people have their own water bottles. And then this is also non-mandatory participation. So we can't mandate that a kid participate as part of this in order to be a part of the team. It is non-mandatory. So that part of it is both if the family doesn't feel comfortable or a student can't be there due to some other obligations. That's understandable. So that's kind of what the phased-in approach, as with everything, and I think it was said again today, like it's about a 2-week, week-to-week thing. If the guidance changes, then we'll obviously update it, but wanted to give some context about returning to sport activities based on our current guidance.
In the end, our conversation has continued to come back to this idea that we cannot predict the future, but we can create the future. And that's where we're spending our time and energy right now, is really on creating the future that we want in the Nelson County schools, knowing that together we can do so much. Damon?
Yeah, I was just curious. I know that there have been several potential reopening scenarios that have been shared for school districts to start kind of thinking through, and not that those are the only ways to do it, but that it's just kind of get the juices flowing, so to speak. Have we started as a district not refining reopening plans, because again, we don't really know what is going to be the right thing come this fall, but have we started at least looking across those proposals and started putting together some basics of what we might have to be looking at?
Yep. So we see two, other than the traditional normal opening. We see two options, and the first option is that we would go back in a hybrid model where you would have potentially an opt into a virtual learning process, depending on a number of variables and requirements, and a traditional model of in-person schooling. And the second model would really be state mandated in the case that the impact of COVID became, larger and/or insurmountable in the eyes of the state, and they mandate that we do not return to in-person schooling. That would be all virtual model. We recognize that state guidance, even on hybrid models, currently and mostly into the future, we expect that to be highly precautious. And but those are the two models. And this week, as we begin to bring the teams, those planning teams, together from across the district, our focus is on resource agility. So when we say resource agility, we look at those two options and we think, what are the shifts we're going to have to make in resources across the district, whether that be in transportation, whether that be in instructional resource, whether that be in human resource. And those are really the two that we're going to begin to build resource agility plans around.
Okay, and of course, again, I know that there's no decision that's been made, and the timeline that you were sharing there, where we're looking at communications with our families in the community, pulling insight from those same families and some of the other stakeholders. all of that will help lead us toward what will be the decision. Looked like from the timeline, the middle part of July, if I remember correctly. It's just I know that there's lots. There is no, and I'm sure you can probably confirm this. There was no section in the superintendent's curriculum on how to deal with a pandemic, and so we're all kind of new at this. But also, I know some districts I think they're waiting for someone to tell them what to do, and it's good to hear that we're being much more proactive in that sense.
Yeah, the letter to families that'll be going home on Friday really does, I think, it goes a long way in clarifying where we stand as a district and where our timeline is, and also what our priorities are. And every parent in the district will be receiving that in the mail, and it'll also have our calendar for the coming year. And we're also going to be reconvening our calendar committee over the course of the next 10 days as we think about the importance of having alternative calendars prepared in the case that we need an alternative calendar. So all that we anticipate being a byproduct of that July 10th target. You'll hear quite a bit about our resource agility planning at the regular board meeting in just a couple of weeks. And to be honest with you, other than the primary shift is in the safety precautions. Instructionally, there are going to be some significant shifts, but they're not anything that we haven't already been thinking about for a few months. We're just going to have to think much more broadly about those.
Well, I appreciate the work that's been put in on that. It's one of those situations where it's much better to have options and solutions and approaches and not need them than to need something and not have anything already thought through. So I appreciate all the work that you and the rest of the district leadership has already put in, as well as what we're going to be getting from our community stakeholders as well.
Yeah, thank you, Damon. We've also Mr. Clark and Bardstown and I have had quite a few conversations, and I've talked a couple times over the past week. We'll be working closely with Bardstown City Schools and thinking about our timeline for communication, ensuring that they're aware of where our conversations are, and same for us. We also recognize that conversations across the state right now, there's a lot of mythology out there. There's a lot of rumor, and that's one reason why we'll be continuing to communicate very intentionally with families about where we stand in Nelson County and about our timeline.
Wes, I know the calendar is due July the 31st, but when you had your meeting with for the superintendents this last week, I think that's when it was, wasn't it? Or yesterday or last week? Was there anything said about maybe extending that deadline, or is it set in stone that we have to have a calendar ready by the 31st?
I think it's based on my conversations, everyone's working from the assumption that you're going to have a calendar ready in advance of the 31st. However, due to just similar to this year, if the state did change guidance or mandates, then the calendar could potentially shift. Our belief is we can be prepared to open on a regular schedule. However, we can't fully predict the nature of guidance from the state and or the evolution of COVID and the data that continues to come to life each week. So I think everyone is working from an assumption that your calendar is going to potentially have to be agile if the impact of COVID continues to be significant.
Okay, there's a possibility. I'm just thinking ahead. a possibility of school beginning, but maybe not what we think school would be beginning.
I think there's a possibility. That's why the calendar committee will be coming together to look at. We'll probably have 3 alternative calendars that we'll be talking about, including our current calendar, which is in place to start on August 5th, and the other calendars will be shared with you as a board team to discuss and evaluate with a recommendation in early July.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. Okay, thank you.
Got it. Thank you, guys.
Section 3B, Master Bell Schedules. Ms. Sikorsky?
Good evening. So every year, the site-based decision-making teams at each school approves their Master Bell schedules for the upcoming school year. And then the Master Bell schedules are approved by the board. So we've linked each Bell schedule here. I did write down a couple. There are only 4 changes. Academy is shifting by 5 minutes, starting 5 minutes later, ending 5 minutes earlier. New Haven is starting 15 minutes earlier. They're going to do some instructional piece with that. ELC is shifting just a little bit due to their new setup. And BMS is starting a little bit, starting 5 minutes earlier. So other than that, everybody looks the same. This is very similar to no matter what happens with our calendar, even if we go to NTI, the Bell schedule will not affect any of that. We'll be still getting our instructional minutes based upon how KDE sets it out, whether it's this or they have NTI minutes changed a little bit like they did towards the end of the school year. But that'll just have to be something too, like Wes is stating, we'll kind of have to see how things roll out to see if that affects it. But at this time, moving forward, we're just looking for approval for the Bell schedules that are linked there for each of the schools that have already been approved by the school site-based decision-making teams.
Understood. Thank you, Jessica. I need a motion to approve each school's Master Bell schedule as presented.
Motion.
Jackie motions.
Second.
Ms. Berry seconds. Mr. Jackie, may I have your vote, please?
Aye.
Ms. Berry?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. All in favor?
Aye.
That's redundant, sorry. Motion carries. Section 3C. Ms. Arnold.
Good evening. The past couple of months, I've had the opportunity to visit with you around the Area Technology Center and to talk about some possibilities that we may have to actually see this center as more of a locally owned center. So tonight, I want to spend some more time to update you where we are on that process and propose that we continue this discussion at our June board meeting and actually take action on transitioning this center to a locally operated center. So the past couple of years, we have been involved in the New Skills for Youth work. Nelson County was a part of our regional cohort with Bardstown, LaRue, and Marion County was with us in the beginning to really look at more regionalized collaboration and to think about ways that we could really help transform career and technical education. So through this regional work, it was really to increase opportunities for post-secondary pathways, to really help students think about career and technical education as dual credit opportunities, to increase work-based learning opportunities for our students, and really to think about what programs and experiences could we offer students that align to the future demands of our workforce. So as we've been involved in this work the past 2 years, Carla, if you'll change it, we have had some successes through our partnerships. We've expanded dual credit opportunities and really aligned programs at the Area Technology Center to associate's degrees with Elizabethtown Community and Technical College. So really helping visualize the need for some type of post-secondary experience aligned to some of these technical fields. We've also expanded partnerships with various community partners, with really our Bardstown Nelson County Chamber being a hub of some of our work, and really thinking about ways we can better partner with small businesses and our larger businesses. And then, as we've shared with you throughout the past year, we've really increased work-based learning experiences, and not necessarily just looking at it from experiences here in Bardstown, but also thinking about those regional, whether you go towards Shepherdsville, Elizabethtown, just wherever there are opportunities that align to interests for students. So we have expanded those from a regional perspective. Next slide, Carla. So as we've been doing this work, we had the opportunity to have some discussions with Representative McCoy and Senator Higdon as they helped lead some legislation that would give school districts the opportunity to have ownership of centers. And in the past, school districts could petition the Department of Ed for local ownership, but you were never able to receive funding. So as I've shared with you last month, we actually have the opportunity to petition for ownership of the ATC and also receive funding, first year fully funded, second year 75% of the funds to actually take ownership of the center. But in order to do this, we have to create an interlocal agreement with our partnering districts, that being Bardstown and LaRue, to ensure that they can still have access to these centers and still be at the table and thinking about what opportunities could look like for our students. So next slide. We, as we think about doing this, it's really asking the question, why do we want to talk about regional ownership? Why couldn't we just continue to work with the Department of Ed and let this facility be managed by the state? So why do we want to do this? Well, all of our partnering districts agree that this definitely gives us flexibility in what type of programming we offer, and can lead to increased student access. So when we talk about flexibility with programming, in the past, if we wanted to talk about changing a program or an instructor, it's a very bureaucratic process where it has to go through several levels of approval with the Department of Ed. So even though we're local and we know our need and our employers are speaking of our need, it's very much a process that can sometimes take up to a year or two to get what you need. So we feel like we can definitely have more flexibility too in how we use our funds. So now it's pretty much determined by the Department of Education. We're given a budget and we're told this is how you spend the money. So this would allow us to have flexibility in how we use funds and what program looks like. So if we have that local ownership in creating programs, then that's going to help get us to those programs faster and really meet the demands of our employers at a faster speed, and also increase experiences for students and get access to those opportunities that we need. And it's really to increase resource agility and support innovative opportunities at really a lower cost to our district, because we will be receiving those funds through the Department of Education. And as I stated earlier, just really getting some of the bureaucratic process out of the way so we can move and take action here locally based on what our community needs. So next slide. So here's where we are in our timeline. I've kind of updated you through April on this possibility. I shared with you that we were going to start working on an interlocal agreement. Interlocal agreement isn't anything new to you all, because we signed one last year that you all approved that said this is how the districts are going to partner together, and this is what it's going to look like from an access point of view for students. So Mr. Bradley led this discussion with our partnering superintendents, and I am bringing to you a draft interlocal. It's actually the next item on the budget, but it very much relates to this conversation. And I'll be asking for you to review that with asking approval at our June board meeting for that interlocal agreement. But really, the interlocal agreement is broken down into 3 chunks. It really lays out management and finances. It's basically saying that these state employees will transition to Nelson County Schools employees, and This could happen as early as July 15th if we take a vote at the June board meeting. The first year, we received 100% of the funds for the school budget. The second year and beyond, based on how the budget language reads, we would get 75%. This is actually in budget language, so for this year's budget of how that would look. Right now, the interlocal would not involve any cost to other districts except for LaRue County. And the reason for that is we're getting 100% of the budget and we're trying to figure out what the future is going to look like. So students and districts would have access like they have in the past going into next school year, recognizing that this interlocal is renewed yearly. So as we think about expanding programs and we think about opportunities, then districts could be asked, community partners could be asked to contribute. LaRue will be contributing to the engineering program because we are not receiving any state funds for the engineering program that we offer. If you recall, we started that program this year. You all assisted in funding that, and districts gave toward that this year for access, and that will continue with them contributing next year. The interlocal also lays out regional collaboration with the Future Ready Alliance team, really being a board that would just provide feedback to you all on decisions and recommendations where we might want to expand programs, where we could get increased work-based learning opportunities. And they're really just more of an advisory capacity that would be made up of our partnering districts and employer community. But the Nelson County Board is the decision-making body for the school and would have be making decisions for the school. And then opportunity and access, again, just laying out what enrollment looks like, again, going into next year. This is basically the same enrollment percentages that we have used in the past. We felt like since funding staying the same, programming staying the same next year, that we'd recommend that pretty much stay the same. LaRue would send 40 students total, and then Bardstown, Nelson County would base theirs on percentages like we have in the past. So when you talk about budget, that's the next slide, Carla. Right now, the state allocates a little over $800,000 toward the ATC. You can kind of see how they break that down into 3 pots. And then they do receive around $24,000 in federal funds, that being Carl D. Perkins funds for career and technical education. So this would be the money that would transfer for fiscal year 21 for the ATC. And then next year, when we would receive the 75%, we would receive from the state $603,000, and then also receive the federal Perkins allocation, which that can sometimes fluctuate year to year, but that federal allotment pretty much has stayed the same consistently for several years. So I just wanted to update you where we are in this process. Wanted you to actually see the budget because this is the first time that you have seen dollar amounts, because Amy and I have been working with KDE to try to get some clarity on that funding. So this is an overview, and I see that Damon does have a question.
So I want to make sure that I follow correctly. The 75% in future years will always be based upon the FY21 budget, or FY20 budget. Which was it? Oh, FY21. I see it there. So that will always be that amount then, regardless of what funding could have been if it remained as a KDE operated area technology center.
Yes, so right now that language is in this year's budget. So I think there are plans to figure out where this language might best fit in the future. But right now it is based on that it would be that 75%, around that 600,000. But what I can tell you just from past history and knowledge, those budgets have been decreasing the past several years. So they, as things have happened with the department and budgets, you have seen that amount decrease.
Well, so you kind of knew where my line of thinking was on that, so I appreciate that. The other question I had, so while I know they have always had very few students there, I didn't see any references to Bethlehem High School. I know it's usually just been a handful. Historically, I think the retiring principal, Tom, I think he had always kind of set the expectation of Bethlehem being a college prep school. We all know that there are a lot of the programs that are at the Area Technology Center, though, that are those stepping stones to those entrance into college fields of study, the health area, engineering, and so on. Is Bethlehem, is this still going to be open to Bethlehem, or will they not be participating in services from the Area Technology Center if we go forward with this?
Yeah, so the interlocal right now, Bethlehem is mentioned in the proposed interlocal that we're going to give you.
Okay.
They have not really been leading in conversation through this process, but we did acknowledge them in the interlocal that if there are vacancies, then they would have access to those. And they have been made aware of that. And we've also opened the door to say in future years, if they would like to be a part of the discussion, that opportunity could be here. Because if you kind of go back to some of our purposes, it's really about increasing access regionally. So if they want those opportunities, they're more than welcome to be at the table in that discussion. Other questions?
No, I'm glad you clarified the subsequent years. I was reading year 1 and 2 and wondered about beyond where we're going to have to carve out 600,000 for this remaining years. And when you follow that up with talk about maybe asking community partners to do, would it be a fundraising effort? But it sounds to me like that's been clarified there. Thank you for acknowledging the 21 budget, 75% for perpetuity, or unless state budgets fluctuate in a downward trend. So I mean, I guess what I'm fearing is a worst case scenario. What could we say would be a worst case scenario 4 years from now?
So based on what is in the existing budget language, it would be that we would have 75% of the $800,000. So we would have that 600,000. But again, to be transparent, that is in budget language. And right now we have a 1-year budget, but we have been working with Senator Higdon and Representative McCoy on what that could look like in the future. And I have a sense of commitment that we will be in a good spot with moving forward with that funding.
Understood.
I want to ask, why is it 75%? Do they get the 25% just to have their name on it? I don't know, why are we missing that one?
So the way the current budget language reads, there are several centers in the state of Kentucky that don't receive any funding at all. One close by would be EC3 in Hardin County. So if you've ever been to Hardin County Center, it's a beautiful facility, but their district currently does not receive funding for that center. So there's a pot where locally operated centers could get access, and the way the budget bill reads, there could be an opportunity maybe for some other CTE program funding throughout the state, but not at the level that we would have an opportunity to grasp onto through this request.
I think the other assumption that they're working from is they've collaborated with local districts to determine what is the right number. And through that collaboration, it ended up around 75%. And I think the prevailing assumption is that 75% will allow us to achieve what's currently in place. And that's why they settled on it, and that's why we're recommending the transition. We think we can achieve this with greater resource agility and opportunities for kids through the local funding model. So.
Okay. So there's enough left over in case something is needed. Is that in case that the district needs help for, is that in the realm of possibility there too?
I think so currently, it would be working from the same assumption that right now, anything that would be additional that the district would add to the Area Technology Center would come at the potential expense of the regionally collaborating districts. But essentially it's a even swap with greater resource agility and greater autonomy and ownership over the center to do what is necessary to work with our community to offer opportunities to kids. So the 75% would allow us to achieve what's currently in place. That's what we're seeing.
Okay, thanks.
Is there further discussion on the 3B for the MCU-ACC interlocal agreement specifically, or pretty much covered it?
No, I felt like it was covered in that presentation, and you saw the slide that identified what was in the agreement.
Understood. Laura, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Hi, board. So I'm just coming to you to discuss your MOA contracts with our 3 behavioral health service providers, Astra, Communicare, and JP Intervention. So they've been with us for quite a while now. And all I'm doing is giving you the contracts so that you can review, and then we will approve them at the board meeting. And I just highlighted on the slide the types of services they offer through individual, group, and family services at all of our schools. And then at the academy, of course, we approved the day treatment and I guess the amendments this past year, and will be on the contract for this year. So all I'm asking at this point is for you to review the contracts, and then we will approve it at the June board meeting.
Definitely will do. Thank you. Five A, that's already been done. Let's see. Policy and procedures, first reading. I believe Carla is up.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So each June we come to you with policy updates. And so tonight I'm just going to read through the first reading of these policies. If you have a question and need to stop me, just unmute your mic and say something I'm not able to see since I'm presenting my screen. I'll just get started.
I think just to provide context, the majority, as you'll see, recommended through KSBA. There are a few local shifts. As we've discussed, almost every shift is very minor in nature, where something either became obsolete or there was an additional word added to provide more clarity. There were no substantive shifts in the local recommendations, and there are fewer than this year than before. Again, big kudos to Carla and the team for continuing to think intelligently about this work. Takes a lot of people looking at our policies and procedures and thinking about it, not just in June, but looking at it throughout the entire year to get us to this point. So thank you.
All right, so I'll just get us started here, and if you have questions, you can stop me. Policy 1.83, in-service training. That's a legal providing that charter authorizer training shall not be required to any board member until a charter application is submitted to the board. Policy 2.31, school resource officers. Senate Bill 8 revises the definition of an SRO training requirements and adds a firearm requirement. 3.11, hiring for certified. This is a legal change replacing the word substantiated finding of child abuse or neglect with administrative finding of child abuse or neglect. 3.121, salaries. This is a legal change, provides that for teachers obtaining national board certification after July 1, if the amount appropriated by the General Assembly is less than $2,000, the board may provide an additional supplement to the total annual supplement of $2,000. 3.12321, certified sick leave exchange bank. We're rescinding this policy due to abolishing the sick leave bank. 3.131 assignment. This is a legal change to remove the exception to hiring language for the spouse of a principal. 3.19 professional development. Senate Bill 8 changes the active shooter training requirement to provide or prepare for the Kentucky Department of Criminal Justice training in collaboration with KDE instead of provided or prepared by KDE. 3.21 hiring for classified. This is a legal change replacing the word substantiated with administrative finding of child abuse or neglect. 3.22321 classified sick leave exchange. We're rescinding this policy due to abolishing the sick leave bank. 3.231 assignment. This is a legal change to remove the exception to hiring language for the spouse of a principal. 3.27 discipline, suspension, and dismissal of classified employees. CDL holder consent is to be obtained in connection with mandatory clearing of the Federal Electronic Clearinghouse, and such employees are disqualified from serving in positions requiring licensure if they refuse to consent. 3.273 retirement. This is an update to match language on Certified Retirement Policy 3.175. It clarifies what is considered retirement for the purpose of compensating for sick leave. 3.29 staff development. Senate Bill 8 revises the definition of an SRO training requirements and adds a firearm requirement. 3.4 substitute teachers. This is a legal change replacing the word substantiated with administrative finding for child abuse or neglect. 4.1 budget planning and adoption. House Bill 352 includes an exception for a working budget with a minimum reserve of less than 2%. 4.22 internal accounts. We're requesting to abolish this policy. Internal school accounts are covered in other policies pursuant to the Red Book, and school food service accounts are no longer kept separate at the school. 4.3111 district issuance of checks. This is just grammatical errors that were corrected. 4.312 school activity funds. Requirements for booster clubs and school activity funds have been updated in the revised accounting procedures for Red Book. 5.4 safety. Senate Bill 8 removes the requirement that a district school safety coordinator be a district level administrator. 5.48 weapons. Senate Bill 8 adds a firearm requirement for school resource officers. 6.221 vehicle operators' use of tobacco and other substances. This is a legal change requiring districts to comply with driver clearinghouse rules, requiring checks on applicants, annual checks on current drivers, and informing drivers of reportable conduct and reporting of disqualifying incidents to the FMCSA database. 7.11 meal pricing. This is just clarity and guidelines around meal charges and requesting refunds. 8.1312 home hospital instruction. This is a legal change creating a new section of KRS Chapter 158 as it relates to home hospital instruction. 8.4 adult community education. This is a legal change allowing virtual high school completion programs. 9.12 admissions and attendance. This is a legal change relating to children in foster care to require collaboration between child caring facilities, child placing agencies, a child state agency caseworker, in school districts and foster parents. 9.1223 persons over compulsory attendance age. Legal change allowing virtual high school completion programs. 9.126 students in military families. This is a legal change regarding housing. 9.15 student fees. This is requirements for school activity funds have been updated in the Red Book. 9.22 student health and safety. This is a legal change requiring suicide prevention training from every other year to every year. 9.2211 employee reports of criminal activity. This is a legal change requiring employees to make certain reports. 9.227 child abuse. This is a legal change requiring employees to make certain reports. 9.33 fundraising activities. Requirements for school activity funds have been updated in the Red Book. I'll move to procedures. Procedures require one reading, so this will be the only reading for procedures. 1.3 AP2 board vacancy forms. This is a legal change providing that charter authorizer training shall not be required to any board member until a charter application is submitted to the board. 1.3 AP 21 application for board vacancy. This change clarifies the question relating to a potential candidate's employment status with the school district and modifies a question about long-range board goals. 2.31 AP 1 school resource officers. This is a legal change, revises the definition of SRO. 3.121 AP 22 certified checklist. This is a legal change replacing the word substantiated with administrative finding of child abuse or neglect. 3.12321 AP 21 sick leave bank deposit authorization. We're rescinding this policy to be consistent with the removal of the sick leave bank. 3.12321 AP 22, same for that, rescinding this policy. 3.12321 AP 23 sick leave bank medical certification form, rescinding that policy. 3.12321 AP 231 return to work recommendations record, rescinding this policy to be consistent with the removal of sick leave bank. 3.1232 AP 1 sick leave donation procedures. There's a revision in the language to be consistent with the removal of the sick leave bank. 3.1232 AP 22 request to receive donated sick leave, revision in the language to be consistent with removal of sick leave bank. 3.19 AP 23 district training requirements. This is a legal change requiring suicide prevention training from every other year to every year. 3.221 AP 22 classified checklist. This is a legal change replacing the word substantiated with administrative finding of child abuse or neglect. 3.22321 AP 2 sick leave bank forms, rescinding this procedure to be consistent with removal of sick leave bank. 3.6 AP 2 volunteer character and fitness. This is a legal change replacing the word substantiated with administrative finding of child abuse or neglect. 6.221 AP 2 drug and alcohol testing notification and general consent. This is a new regulation for all CDO operators. 9.14 AP 232 release of records to state child welfare agency. This is a legal change to address sharing education record information relating to children placed in foster care. 9.227 AP 1 child abuse, neglect, and dependency. Legal change requiring employees to make certain reports. And 9.425 AP 22 assault and threats of violence, notice of penalties and provisions. This is a legal change to the definition of terroristic threatening. And that's it.
Thank you, Carla. All the numbers and letters there on the titles are overwhelming, I'm sure. They sure don't like the word substantiated or have found a better use, haven't they? Let's see. We will, I assume, remember the first reading at the regular session and pass it all at one time, I assume?
Yes, sir. So this tonight was the first reading. Procedures only need one reading. So at the regular session in June, we'll place these on the consent agenda for a second reading unless anyone has any questions between now and then. If you do, just let us know. Otherwise, they'll be on the consent agenda for approval.
Okay. Thank you. Time to adjourn. I need a motion to adjourn. Unless there's other commentary, thoughts, concerns.
I was gonna let ladies go first since I made the other motion.
Oh, well, I'll make a motion then. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll second it.
Okay. Second by Mr. Jackie. Mr. Jackie, go ahead and vote, please.
Aye.
And Ms. Berry, please.
Aye.
Aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you all. Thank you, board team. Thank you, leadership team. Lots of good news, and look forward to the evolution of our return to school. See you next time.
Everybody be safe.
You too. Bye-bye.